Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Sloan, and we're chatting today with Amy Kennedy, who is running in the 2nd New Jersey Congressional District. Amy, thanks so much for spending a few minutes to chat with me. Just first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on today, Christine. I am talking to you today from Brigantine, New Jersey. I've lived in Atlantic County my whole life. My family has lived in Atlantic County for 4 generations. I'm a former public school teacher. I taught right here in Northfield, New Jersey for nearly 14 years at the Mill Road School there. And now I'm raising my own 5 kids and focused on mental health advocacy over the past few years.
So you're also married to Patrick Kennedy, he is a former congressman who is the son of Ted Kennedy. How did the two of you meet?
Patrick came to Atlantic City to give a speech at the ARC of Atlantic County's annual event. And he was speaking there about his Aunt Eunice and her work in forming Special Olympics. And my dad, having been a special ed teacher, had gotten tickets to the event and cares a lot about this. And so I went with my mom, and Patrick and I met at that evening, and then he had already decided not to run for re-election. So he started to come up and visit, and that was back in 2010.
That's pretty good. You managed to get him to move to New Jersey.
Well, I wasn't going anywhere. So, my whole family's here. My brothers live here. My parents still also are in Smithville. So this is home for me.
Your dad was also a lawmaker.
That's it. My dad was really involved locally here in Atlantic County. He was a councilman in Pleasantville, where we lived when I was young, and in Absecon. And then he also was a freeholder for Atlantic County.
So you're running in a purple district. So the independents really matter. You're running against Republican Congressman Jeff Van Drew, who was a Democrat and switched party and gave his support to President Donald Trump. What kind of plan are you offering, and why do you think that it is an important time for you to run?
Oh, I think it's really important across the country. Everything that we've seen, the division that we've seen in this country, it makes it such a compelling time to be involved and to make sure that everybody's voices are being heard at this moment, especially not just Democrats, not just those from your own party, but the independents that you mentioned make up 37% of this district. So we want to talk to all the voters of South Jersey, Republicans, Democrats, independents, and make sure that they understand what's at stake here. That when we are talking about this virus and its impact, we of course need to be focused on things like healthcare and how the economy can be built back better, and make sure that we're looking for ways to diversify so that there really are great job opportunities in South Jersey. And that's going to include things like building out our infrastructure and making sure that we protect the pensions and Social Security for those who have already worked so long.
You're saying, we are facing the biggest health crisis of our generation. At this moment, more than 177,000 people have died from the coronavirus. How would you handle this differently than the federal government?
I think it's really important now that we're looking ahead at how we can come back from this time, and in doing so that we've got a real plan of action for how we can trace, how we can make sure that we have all of the systems in place should we be presented with an influx again, or a spike in cases, that we're ready to address it. And that in the meantime, we're doing what we can to bring back small businesses. We know how many have been hurt, but we also know that one of the biggest challenges moving forward will be maintaining health insurance for those who have lost their job during this time. Because you can't talk about this virus without talking about health insurance and providing coverage so that when someone feels sick, that they don't avoid getting the care they need because it's just too expensive.
You know, this crisis has left so many people unemployed, as you were saying, and they're facing a whole crisis of their own. It's an uncertain time. It's terrifying for many. And there has been a lot of anger down south in your area, in your district, about small businesses, especially gyms shutting down. A lot of people are angry that a lot of these businesses have not been able to open. What do you support what Governor Murphy has been doing when it comes to that?
I think that real anger and fear that we see is because people are worried about whether they'll have enough to provide for their families. And that's a very real concern that I think has to be addressed. And that's where the federal government plays an important role in making sure that the stimulus that we've seen in past weeks be part of any plan moving forward. And that as we do reopen, and I think that the governor's leadership in our state has been really strong on our response, but we know that there will be a time when all of these small businesses are reopened, and that we're doing in a way that can be safe and that also makes sure that it's a winning proposition for those small business owners, because we know there are many small businesses who, if they operate at half capacity, it might not be a viable option for them. So how do we support them through this transition period so that when they do open, that they're still able to cover their costs and stay in business long after this virus has passed?
What I have not seen are a lot of plans to help businesses, you know, for instance, with structural plans. I've seen a lack of that all across the nation. I mean, not just in New Jersey, but in New York. We're still not seeing a lot of restaurants in New York opening inside, and there's just no plan for it as of yet at this moment. Are there any plans that you would have to help these businesses, you know, be able to, like, for instance, restaurants? Before the pandemic, 95% of what they made went to overhead costs,
Yeah.
and now we're hearing a lot of these restaurants won't exist past November or December. How can you help them? Like, if you were elected, what would you do differently?
Yeah, thank you, Christine. As a mom who has to make sure there's dinner for 5 kids, that is a terrifying thought that we might not have the small businesses and restaurants that you're mentioning. And that's why I'm supporting that Restaurant Act that we've heard a lot about, because we know all the independent restaurants really have struggled, not only with not being able to dine indoors, but even the idea, as you mentioned, of not having the financial resources to put in extra precautions. So, and it's not just the restaurants, even, whether it's the buses that need a different type of shield, banks, that all of the places that are retrofitting their shops and their transportation and others, even schools that are having to add new features, that costs money.
Yeah.
And although the CARES Act can provide for some of that, we know that a lot of businesses are having to pick up whatever costs haven't been covered by that. And yet it's an essential part of moving forward in a safe way. And it's something that we probably will be a good idea for our overall health moving forward. So I think continuing to make sure the funding's in place, looking at how we can diversify our economy here in South Jersey, for me, will be an important part, because while it's fantastic that people are here right now for summer weather, we want to be able to draw people off season. And that's where I think I could help play a strong part. What can we do to bring those same crowds year round? Because we are in a fantastic location between New York, Philly, DC. And how do we get those visitors to keep coming back?
I mean, I'm sure there are plans out there. I mean, just thinking about it as you're talking about this, I'm thinking drive-through windows. I'm thinking, windows outside of restaurants, and all of this costs money, right? That you could put up and bring in the outdoor air indoors. There are so many different things. And I think at this point, these businesses are just trying to survive, right? They're just trying to make it through the next day, survival mode for many of us. How do you think the president should have handled the COVID-19 crisis? At the beginning, we heard him, really just sort of not talk about it. And then we had a national mandate, but there's never been like a mask mandate by him. It's been left to the states. What would you do in Washington?
It's easy, I think, to look back and wish things had gone differently and that there'd been a different response or a faster response. I think that's what everyone would agree on, that the response time was just not quick enough to slow the spread in a way that we needed. I am sure that where we go from here needs to include more tracing and more testing. It's still difficult to get a test if you're not showing symptoms. And I think the turnaround time for those tests is really problematic, because if it takes too long to get those results, you may have already infected others, or you're having to stay home in the situation of, for example, returning to school. If somebody is displaying symptoms and they have to wait 10 to 14 days for test results, that's all time that they're not back to work or back in the classroom. So being able to speed those up and provide more is going to be the path forward. And that would be something I would want to work on in Congress, as well as just supporting the families who are going to continue to struggle. One area where we see the biggest impact is on women, and how many women may not rejoin the workforce even on the other side of this virus. So being able to support women as they try to re-enter the workforce and looking for long-term solutions to the childcare crisis in this country.
We've seen New Jersey offer a combination of in-person and virtual learning. Do you think it is it safe to go back in the classrooms?
I think schools are all different. As I mentioned, I taught middle school, and I think dealing with different age children, you'll have different challenges, but we also know that schools have different challenges just based on the facility itself and on whether or not students are bused, and can they social distance on the buses, or are they able to put kids in pods? And there's a lot to consider here. Each district being able to decide whether or not they're equipped is going to be important, and looking at the ventilation system in each of these buildings is going to be key.
You were saying that, we were talking about your district being purple in 2008. Voters, chose President Barack Obama. In 2016, it was Donald Trump. How do you woo those independents? How do you get them to come in your corner?
I think that there are a lot of people in this district who understand that we have a discussion about issues and policy, but what they're not willing to negotiate on is trust in the person that they elect. And I think that's where the difference really lies. There are, reasons, I think, to question my opponent in terms of integrity and character, whether or not they can really trust that he's going to represent the things that he says he will represent if elected again.
Our country is also coming to terms with racial injustice. As a white suburban woman, what are you able to offer to heal the wounds?
Well, I think that it really is going to be a challenge that's not just on me, but on all of us, that we are listening, that we are making sure that we're beginning that conversation by taking a backseat and listening to what the demands of the community are, and that we can recognize the bias and then move forward from that lens of looking at equity. Because obviously I am coming from that place of privilege, and we have to acknowledge that first if we're going to be able to make those differences in our community. But I think in looking at that, are able to help all people in South Jersey. When we have healthier, stronger communities, we all benefit.
Have you had those conversations?
Absolutely. I think any representative from this district needs to do that, needs to be reaching out in all communities of color, and we're doing that every day, and we're reaching out to faith leaders in the community, NAACP, working out in the community, and making sure that we're also reaching out to law enforcement as well, because this isn't going to be a solution from just one side. It has to be people coming together that all want what's going to be in the best interests of South Jersey.
What are the biggest concerns that you're hearing?
You know, I think it's just that we aren't so polarized. I think the biggest concerns are that it will be one extreme or another, and that's not where South Jersey is looking to land. I think there's a lot of people who want to see change, but also understand the value of law enforcement, and that we can recognize that while still acknowledging that there are areas that need change and where we can do better is really important. And that's the sense that I've gotten from both sides, frankly, that there's been an acknowledgement of bias and that we can do more to train our law enforcement, and that NAACP and other groups are willing to work toward that end.
Amy, thank you so much for taking a moment to talk to me about very important issues during an historic election. So we thank you so much. And of course, we'll be sending out an invitation to Congressman Jeff Van Drew as well. Amy, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be with you, Christine.
Great to be with you. Thanks again.